You are liars. Statistics is horrible. At least that's what all my students think. I have come to doing online video in statistics because usually what presented itself to me in the lecture hall during my lectures was quite akin to this. So my students hated it. You have to know that I'm not teaching statistics to mathematicians, but to psychology students. And psychology students are not particularly keen on doing statistics. Because in Germany, the main motivation for getting into psychology is not getting into statistics, but becoming a psychotherapist. So most of my students do not see why statistics are even important to them. And I thought that with doing online videos and enriching my lectures with multimedia elements, I could go from this to this. Completely empty the lecture hall and have all my students sit at home so I don't have to see their completely demotivated faces anymore. But as I came to realize, that was one of the gravest mistakes or misconceptions that I had about my lectures and about online video in lectures. I started with something that was looking like this. You all know screencasts, and in 2012, when the MOOC hype just emerged, we started doing MOOCs, which were quite professionally produced. We set up a studio, we bought semi-professional equipment, and we tried to do statistics in a fun way. So one of the courses was, it's German of course, it was called Introduction to Probability Theory. And the other course was called Introduction to Inferential Statistics. So in total we did 5 courses, 2 of which have been run as MOOCs, and the other 3 are not yet in MOOC format, but they are open education resources, so anybody who finds the link can enroll in those courses. In that MOOC we had about 7,000 students enrolled, and meanwhile about 400 plus of my own students attended. We had participants from all over the world. I don't know how those people from, say, India understood my German, because my German is even worse than my English, so I don't know that. But all of those 5 courses that make up the whole content of 2 semesters statistics. I teach statistics 1 and 2 in the Bachelor of Science semesters 1 and 2. So those 5 MOOCs cover 2 semesters. And one of those MOOCs, this MOOC, has about 6 lectures, about 100 videos, 350 quiz questions associated with each video, and 6 homework assignments after each week. The students complete an Microsoft Excel-based homework assignment, and then there is a final exam after 1 semester. So we thought, well, we are statisticians, so let's not just make that MOOC, let's do some scientific research about it. And I was particularly interested in the learning outcomes, because why do all that what I'm going to show you if it does not make a difference? You know, we want to see the students getting better. And we thought about how we could measure them getting better, and we didn't want to do such a big fuss about it, so we just looked at the exam results, which is a quite awkward measure, but we didn't come up with anything better, and the literature also hasn't come up with much better things than just looking at the exams. We can somewhat guarantee that the exams are, at least over the years, of comparable difficulty, because we choose our exam questions from a large pool of exam questions that we compiled a few years ago, and no question repeats over the years, no task repeats over the years, so we could very well assume that by randomizing the questions we have about the same difficulty But all the statistical results I'm going to show you are to be taken with a grain of salt. They are tentative at best, but they maybe perhaps show a way towards what we could do to make MOOCs or online video, online courses work. The first set of data I am going to present to you is from my statistics lectures, 1 and 2. The students do get 2 credit hours per week, and they also have a student-assisted tutorial. We have about 170 students enrolled per semester, and until the summer semester of 2012, I held this course as a classical conventional lecture. In the lecture hall, I was present, I talked about statistics, and my students listened. After the winter semester of 2012-2013, we converted the whole course into online video, into MOOCs or online courses, and had my students complete those online courses. And the data I'm going to present to you were collected during those periods of time. So first, I'm going to show you the exam grades over the years where I held the conventional lecture, where I stood in front of my students and just talked about statistics. And those grades were rather good, I think, for statistics in psychology. The numbers in the blue circles are the ratio of points achieved to total points achievable, and the German grades we grade from 1, which is very good, to 6, which is failed, flunked, are quite well. We lie in the very upper 4th of the grade scale. So grades were very good. And in the 2 semesters where I produced the MOOC, I was so exhausted from producing the MOOC, and I put so much time into it, that I thought, well, I'm not going to stand in the lecture hall. These MOOCs must suffice. I won't pamper my students more than just giving them those great online videos and have them complete the online videos, the quizzes, the assessments, have them discuss in the forums. I'd have a look at the forums and answer their questions, but I refused to hold the conventional lecture. I didn't know about flipped classroom then. So that was very, very optimistic from me. What I saw in those 2 semesters was that the grades dropped significantly. The students with all the online videos and the additional material and the quizzes got worse, and that is substantial. That's a drop of 15 to 20% in achieved points, which is massive. So something had to be done about it. But being an empirical psychologist, I first looked at the data we gathered from our learning platform. And the data showed us, of course, why the students were dropping in performance. What you see here is on the vertical axis, the weeks, the course weeks completed by a student. And by completed, we meant the students watched about 80% of the videos for that week. The horizontal axis shows where the students actually were. And where you see the blue colors, very few students are, and where you see the red colors, very many students are. So, when we look at, say, week 6, most of the students are around lecture 2 to 4. So, at week 6, most of the students did not even have completed week 4 in online videos. So they just didn't attend. They just didn't watch the video. Maybe they were demotivated. Maybe they thought, well, those videos are online the whole time. I can watch them next week. And next week they think, well, I can watch them next week. And at some point in time, the exam comes, and suddenly they realize, well, statistics isn't learned in a week, which is surprising to many. So we thought, well, flip the classroom, and everything will get better. I read into flipped classrooms, read into what can be done with flipped classrooms, about the methods to be used in a flipped classroom. And I found that I was indeed in very good company. The US Department of Education in 2010 issued a report saying that blended learning has positive effects on learning outcomes and on student motivation and also on teacher motivation. So I thought, well, this is a good thing. Flipped classroom, this is it. And indeed, grades got better. In already the first semester of my flipped classroom endeavors, but as you can also see, they did not get better than before I even started doing the MOOCs. They were almost exactly at the same level as before I even started making online videos. So all was for naught, I thought. And of course, this is reflected by the attendance rates. We see from the usage data from our learning platform that students do indeed manage to keep up with the course, that the flipped classroom part actually helps the students to do their work and to attend the course, so they stay more in touch with the course of the statistics lecture. But some of the students don't. They don't even show up. About 1/3 of all students do not show up in most of the flipped classroom in-class lessons, which is bad, I think. But we can't do anything about it because we can't force them to come. It's attending the lecture is not mandatory, but facultative. So can't be done anything about that. The second problem that our data told us was the proportion of failed students, the proportion of students who do not manage to achieve the necessary points to pass the exam. And of course, in the two semesters where I did not offer the flipped classroom part, those failure rates went up. But even with the flipped classroom, the failure rates do not completely drop to what I saw before. And I thought about why that is. And I haven't come up with a definite explanation for that. But what we can say from the data is that the flipped classroom leads to shifts in student performance to the extremes of the scale. The good students get better, but the bad students get even worse. And that's a problem, because students who would have just barely passed the exam will now fail the exam. Because somehow these online videos, the things I demand from my students in the flipped classroom part, they are obviously quite repulsatory to my students, and they don't attend the classes. They just fall behind, they lose track, and they fail the exams. Maybe that's a good thing, because we squeeze out those students who did not belong into the psychology classes in the first place, but I don't think so. I do think that something needs to be done about this end of the scale. We then thought, well, if maybe we don't see effects, or that large of effects, in the first attempt of students, but in the second attempt. Because in the second attempt, when students have failed the exam once and then re-attend, mostly the course is not held in that semester. So students are forced to repeat the exam in a semester where they can't attend the course. And that, of course, is bad, because if they failed the first time when they could attend, why should they pass in a semester where the course isn't even offered? But that's not the case either. We do not see any performance increase when students repeat their exam. due to the videos being rewatchable, due to the content being there all the time. This does obviously not matter. So it's a problem. And we are not alone in our observations. A large study from a US university, they issued some pre-publication reports, suggest that flipping classrooms indeed may not make much of a difference. And this meta-analysis, which was published in 2015, some months ago, says, you can't read it, but I'll read it to you. They say that there is much indirect evidence emerging of improved academic performance. So indirect evidence. We do not have direct evidence, so much of direct evidence in favor of MOOCs, in favor of online learning, in favor of flipped classrooms. We do have singular reports, but we don't see many studies published about really amazing stuff that MOOCs and online courses can do, that flipping classrooms can do, which is quite disappointing, I thought. So we have moderate benefits at best. And now we must look at the expenditure of time and resources. One of the examples I always give is from Theo Bastians, who talked about a MOOC that was produced at the Fernuniversität in Hagen, which has about 84,000 students, and they made, in the summer of 2013, the decision to produce a MOOC. And out of the 84,000 students in Hagen, about 1,800 or 1,400 enrolled, and of them 43 or 42 actually completed the course. So we see the drop rates, which are quite common for MOOCs, and all that cost 30,000 euros, which is about the same in US dollars. So it's very expensive. But I'm not interested in the monetary aspects. What I'm much more interested in are the time aspects. Not the workload of students, but my workload as a lecturer, as somebody who does the MOOC. And it is very easily understood that you need much more personal and time resources to produce a MOOC, because it's not just you as a lecturer standing in front of your students, but you need to have a crew who does the studio rigging, who does the recording, who does the post-production, who do the platform, publication. And with a flipped classroom, I do not only have to do the recording, but I also have to do the lecture. So I could already imagine that the time spent on my preparing the MOOC and then doing the flipped classroom was massive. But massive is not some quantifiable data. So while we produced the MOOC, we did some sort of online diary. We had a very brief online questionnaire, me and my students, where we, after each day, went and clicked on some aspects of production, like scripting, studio recording, additional recordings, post-production, publication, maintenance, and we attached the number of hours we spent on each of the items per day in a diary. So after producing the MOOC, we would have a day-by-day protocol of what we did, of the time we spent on the different aspects of making a MOOC. Up there on the right, you see what a conventional lecture takes me in terms of time. I need to prepare the lecture, of course. That may be too much, given that I hold these courses every year. So 60 minutes at maximum I need to prepare a lecture. Then I give the lecture 90 minutes, and then I do maybe some additional work, which is already at the high end, this 60 minutes there. So 3.5 hours for a normal, common, conventional in-class lecture is, I think, a quite progressive estimate. What did the diary tell us? Well, first thing, planning. You see on the left the time I as a lecturer spent, and on the right the time my student assistants spent on the MOOC. Planning took us about, on average, 1.5 hours per week. Most of the planning was done in a group, so me and my students sat together and talked about what we were going to do, how we were going to film it, the contents, and so on. Then I did scripting. At first I thought, well, in German I am a moderately good speaker, so I can stand myself in front of the camera and just give my lecture. But then I realized that standing in front of a camera is very, very different from standing in front of an auditorium, because you always know that you can repeat. And if you say or you just have used the wrong word or something like that, you will stop and redo the take. So it takes you forever to get it right, to get it perfect. And after having spent about, I think, 3 hours in my initial studio session, and having produced 3 sentences in those 3 hours, which I was satisfied with, I thought, well, that's never going to fly. I need to script. And we have done a grant offering at the University of Mainz where we gave about 20,000 euros to 5 of my colleagues to have them produce a MOOC, and all of those 5 colleagues were completely optimistic about getting in front of the camera and just talking their lecture. And all of those 5 did not listen to my advice, use a teleprompter and script what you're going to say, and all of them have a teleprompter now. So they made the same experiences. You can't talk perfectly when you are not reading something. So scripting took a long time for me, 6 hours a week, to produce 90 minutes of talkable script. My students were not involved that much in scripting. I gave the script to them to look over it and to point out the errors and stuff like that. So they had a bit of time spent on the scripts, but not too much. Then the presentation won't continue. I'm clicking. It doesn't do anything. I think it crashed again. So,
1 second.
Yeah. So I just walk you through the numbers that would have appeared there, because those numbers are quite easy to report. And I just wait for the thing to continue. So after that we had recording. Recording takes you quite a lot of time because you don't do it all in one take. So recording was a significant amount of time too. I think also about 5 to 6 hours on average for me and my students, because I was in the studio talking, and my students were also in the class in the studio and did all the camera work and the light work and the sound work. So we all were together in the studio. Then I also produced additional material, and additional material was like I went to the city of Mainz and asked some people to measure the length of a cassette tape, and then I recorded their responses, and I used those data to exemplify statistical error in measurement. Or other things like that I didn't do in the studio, but I did outside of the studio, which I very much did myself. So my students weren't involved with that too much, But we do have a presentation again. Yeah, great, cool, we are there. So, recording, additional recording in sum, also about 8 hours per week. Then, we have post-production. In the first week, I accompanied my students during post-production, but then I handed over post-production completely to my students. So I wasn't involved with the post-production too much, but my students did spend a considerable amount of time on post-production. Then we had publication, which I also handed over to my students because I didn't want to upload all the videos. And then we had maintenance, which took not so much of time. Maintenance is like weekly mails to the enrolled students and answering to forum posts and pointing out errors in the videos which may happen and stuff like that. This drop in time here in week 8 was due to a breakage in a freshwater pipe on the floor of my department, and we couldn't film during that week, so that is the time drop there. On average, I spent about 20 hours a week, each week, to produce that MOOC, and my students spent about 18 hours a week to produce the videos, which is massive. Compare that to the 3 hours of conventional lecture time. It doesn't compare. It's way more. What's not included, I even left out some portions of time expenditure in the data I just showed you. What's not included is the initial studio setup. We had to set up the studio. It was self-preparation in technical matters, like I had to learn post-productions to show it to my students. And then, of course, instructional meeting with my students to teach them post-production, camera work, sound work, and stuff like that. In total, I spent 332.5 hours on that MOOC, and my students in total 218.5 hours. I converted into salary costs for my university. This is about 35,000 euros for me, and 2,500 euros for my students. So it's very, very expensive, both in time and in money. This is, if I could have transferred my MOOC preparation time into my teaching load, I would have done nothing for the next 3 semesters. This is 3 complete semesters worth of teaching load. During the whole MOOC time, I had 2 to 3 students assigned entirely to MOOC production. And the student training that I have to do, post-production, show them sound editing, stuff like that, recurs due to high fluctuation in our student population. So it's very, very time-consuming, not only for me, but for my students too. So my resume, after doing this, was if I got asked, should I digitize my lectures? Your videos look so good. When a colleague asked me that, I always asked him, are you a professor already? And if he said no, I said no. And if he said yes, I said, yeah, do it. Just do it, you know. So it takes you out of your research activities. You are doing the whole week, you're doing nothing but a MOOC. And this is reflected by my colleagues answering to a questionnaire I sent out a few semesters ago, where I asked them 6 very simple questions. I asked them, have you ever produced multimedia content for your teachings? And most of them say no. I asked them, have you ever considered to do? Some of them answer yes, but many of them answer still no. And if I ask them, have you produced a MOOC yet? Only one answers yes, and that's myself. But that's not the problem. When you look at these figures and the time expenditures that I showed you, you will come to realize that forcing teachers or lecturers to produce online video is irresponsible. You can't do that because they spend so much time on it. So why not import videos, online courses from other universities, like already done in the US, to complement or even replace the in-class lectures that colleagues are giving. So the remainder 3 questions that I asked them was, would you use an external online course, not produced by you, but containing videos where you see another lecturer lecturing about your subject to replace your own lectures? Most of my colleagues, 51 colleagues were asked, say no, I wouldn't. I would never use videos from another person to complement my teaching or even replace my teaching. But if they ask them, well, would you consider supplementing other lecturers' courses at your department with online videos? They say, yeah, you could do that, you know. So what is reflected by that is that there is a great reluctance to use online material in your own courses. And I felt the same way myself. Because when you use online video, you are comparable to the person who does the online video. And most often, the person doing the online video, the speaker in the online videos, will come across more friendly, more competent, more eloquent. They will just be the better lecturer. And they can be directly compared to yourself doing the in-class part of, say, a flipped classroom. So I understand why my colleagues are so reluctant to use MOOCs, to use external sources in their courses. And not only my colleagues are, there are professors at San Jose who won't use a Harvard professor's MOOC because they say the MOOC doesn't fit our curriculum, it's too expensive, we use online material or teaching material which is years old and we don't get the updates. There are frictions between what we like to teach and what is taught in the MOOC. So there are aspects that do speak against using a MOOC, an online course, externally produced in your own lectures. I understand that. So is it all for nothing? Should we return to conventional lectures? If we can't get the grades up, if we can't get the failure rates down, and have to spend hundreds of hours of time and tens of thousands of euros or dollars on producing that MOOC. Is it really worth it? And at some point I thought, no, I just do my conventional lectures again. But then I reconsidered my data. And I saw that my teaching evaluations were very, very high. My students liked the course, even before I used the online videos. And also the grades, which are not perfect, but I asked my colleagues in Germany, who are also doing statistics in psychology, how my grades compare to their grades. And they said, well, your grades are quite good. Your students are quite good. Your students are obviously capable. So maybe I don't see effects because we have a ceiling effect. We can't get better. The course is already so good that there is little room to make it even better. And then I thought about who would be so crazy as to decide, well, I'm going to digitize my lectures and spend dozens, hundreds of hours on that. Well, of course, it won't be the lecturer who has lectured for the last 50 years, 40 years, who doesn't like lecturing, who holds bad lectures, but it will always be the already motivated lecturers, the good lecturers, the lecturers who care about lecturing, who care about teaching, who care about the learning outcomes of their students. So, of course, we have all those MOOCs, all those online videos made by university staff who already did quite a hell of teaching before. they decided to get into online course production. What we did then was to convince one of my colleagues who held a very bad lecture, who was always struggling with his student motivations. His students hated the lecture. He had very bad grades. He had a very high failure rate, and he was very unhappy with his own teaching. And I said to him, well, listen, we just set up a camera in your lecture hall. We record you. We have student staff cut those videos into smaller parts, have them do assessments, because they are psychology students who can do those quizzes, who can think of quiz questions to accompany a video. And then the only thing you are doing beyond having that live lecture recorded is to do a flipped classroom the next semester and onward. So he would have had not that high of a resource and time expenditure above what he would conventionally invest. But of course, we needed student assistance. This was his reaction when he saw the first set of videos that we recorded and showed to him. He said, "This must never be seen. Delete the videos." He hated himself in those videos. And it took a while for me to fully realize what that meant. There was a lecturer who held that lecture for, I think, about 8 years. And then we recorded him. He looked at himself, and he couldn't stand himself teaching. You know, it was completely baffling to me. So we thought, well, what can we do to have him be more confident about his videos? And then we came up with something that we call scripted lecturing. We did the live recording of his lecture in semester 1, but then we had students transcribe that lecture, make a script of it. Then in semester 2, get him into the studio and just read his script from a teleprompter. So he didn't change much, but his whole appearance in front of the camera was different because he had the confidence of the teleprompter, of a transcribed live recording that he himself did 1 semester before. And then everything else went as before. We had the students do the quizzes and the assessments, and then he held the flipped classroom. So we have little additional time for him. He had to get into the studio, and he had to prepare for the flipped classroom, but it wasn't that massive of a time hog that I had experienced before. But we had student hours to do the post-production and the assessment and all other things. So what did we find? We find in his lecture, with about 60 students enrolled per semester, so we are talking about 240 students who make up the data that I'm going to show you now. These are his grades in the offline part, in the last 2 semesters where he held his course as a conventional in-class lecture. And these are the grades with the videos. He didn't change much in terms of content. He just did the videos, and the quizzes were done by students, and the videos were post-produced by students, and the grades go up way, way beyond what he had ever seen. Also, the second attempt failure rate dropped, and the second attempt grades increased. So students who had to repeat the course got better with the online video. Of course, the students work much more in that flipped classroom setting. Compared with what we saw in the conventional lecture, which is denoted in blue here, students work about 80% more. They spend about 80% more time on preparations, watching the videos, attending the flipped classroom, doing the quizzes, and all stuff like that. So you have to keep in mind the increased workload when you conceptualize such an online lecture. And and other teachers are seeing that too. The increased workload seems to be a very common thing when you implement online courses and do them as flipped classrooms. The teaching evaluation also got better. So the students liked the flipped classroom concept, the online videos, much better than the conventional lecture. Although it was the same person talking about the same stuff, just in front of a camera for the online videos, and in terms of a flipped classroom setting in the in-class lectures. There wasn't that much of a difference, but students liked it very, very, very much, at least much more than they did before. So flipping classrooms not making much of a difference, to me, is not true. What we see is that online videos, that the use of MOOCs in university teaching can make a difference. Students form groups to study. They do not sit in front of their own computer screens alone and watch the videos, but they form spontaneous study groups. We know that students feel more motivated by the flipped classroom part because they have a more close relationship with their teacher. We also know that the quizzes do quite a lot of good because they keep up motivation, they keep up concentration, and I think that the quizzes also help to control whether to prove to yourself that you have understood what you should have learned in the video, and they also tell you when you have not, so you can repeat watching the video. But our main finding, or my strong belief after those endeavors into online courses, and particularly the second part, is that we should not feel discouraged by the very meager results, the very disappointing research that is done about online courses and the use of flipped classroom. Because I think that it may well be a question of space to improve. When you take a very good lecturer and have him do a MOOC and have him do a flipped classroom, that may not make much of a difference. But if we can get our not so good lecturers, the lecturers who struggle with their lectures, to at least do the scripted lecturing thing, they will improve. Their grades will improve. Their teaching evaluations will improve. And my colleague told me he had never had that much fun in a classroom setting like he had in the flipped classroom setting. So we should take that online video, that digitization of lecture content, not so much into, or we should give it not so much into the hands of the already good lecturers, but we should try to set up an environment where all of the other lecturers who might not consider doing online videos, to do online videos and to do flipped classroom. So our recommendation is do teaching videos, maybe use the scripted lecturing thing to reduce the time expenditure on the part of the lecturer. He doesn't have to do much more. And then have all the other things like the MOOC, typical aspects, quizzes, flipped classroom, additional materials, final exams, stuff like that. Surround this teaching video, scripted lecturing based lecture approach, flipped classroom approach, and then I think we will see that grades go up, and not only for the few student groups who come to enjoy a good teacher, but also for those who just have the online videos and can, by the online videos, by the rewatchability of the online videos, by the quizzes, and by all the accompanying things, improve their own performance in the class. So we shouldn't throw the MOOCs and the flipped classroom out of the window because we haven't found significant effects before, but we should try to convince the lecturers that are maybe struggling with their courses to do a flipped classroom, and I think that we will see huge improvements. Thanks a lot.